Good morning, I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Right now on Morning News Now, back to business. President Biden kicks off his first official trip to Europe in earnest this morning, sitting down with Britain's Boris Johnson. On the agenda, reforging a centuries-long relationship complicated by former President Trump. But will the prime minister play ball? Here to help, the president will also soon announce a landmark aid package to countries still struggling with surging COVID cases. 500 million doses of Pfizer's vaccine doled out to 100 countries over the next year. A closer look at the administration's ambitious blueprint for combating a global shot shortage. Flipping the script, you may think you know what happened last summer in Washington, D.C., when federal law enforcement violently cleared protesters from gathering at Lafayette Square just outside the White House. Well, it reportedly wasn't for a presidential photo op. The bombshell new Inspector General report that clears the air. And out of office, the U.S. is in the midst of a post-pandemic hiring crisis. And now, as a record number of Americans are heading back to the airports for summer travel, the TSA is reporting a major staffing shortage. How the agency and other companies across the country are working to return to business as usual. I think we've both experienced, as we've been easing back into some work travel, that airports are quite crowded.
They are very busy, and June is busy no matter what, especially on weekends.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sure we'll see that huge jump from last year to this year as everybody
wants to travel.
It's time for a vacation. We'll get to that in a little bit, but we begin this morning with the president's first trip overseas and his message to allies during his first stop.
We made it clear that the United States is back and democracies of the world are standing together to tackle the toughest challenges and the issues that matter most to our future.
The president delivered that speech to U.S. troops during his first stop in London. He's now in Cornwall, where he'll meet with UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson today. NBC News foreign correspondent Matt Bradley joins us now from the town of Penzance in Cornwall. So, Matt, we just heard a little of President Biden's message during his speech to those troops yesterday. What else did he have to say, and what's the tone he's setting for the rest of this trip?
Yeah, I mean, that is actually the main message. But if you look a little behind that, the main message here is basically that America wants to kind of renew its vows when it comes to a lot of international institutions. This whole meeting with Boris Johnson today, they're going to be announcing what they've called an Atlantic Charter. That's the same name that was given to a sort of another agreement back in 1941 between Franklin Delano Roosevelt and Winston Churchill. And this same notion is behind this. Basically building up or rebuilding the international institutions, the sort of liberal international governance that President Trump sneered at for the 4 years and before that he was in office. So they're going back to this and saying that we need to renew our interest in international institutions, our reliance on these international institutions. But behind all of this, you're talking about the attitude and what they're projecting. The elephant in the room is going to be that meeting with Vladimir Putin next week. This is really going to be hanging over everything because a lot of this G7 meeting is all about taking on autocrats like Vladimir Putin, like Xi Jinping of China, and essentially telling them that they won't be able to boss anybody else around. And so this is what we heard from Joe Biden as well when he was talking about meeting with the Russian president.
The United States will respond in a robust and meaningful way when the Russian government engages in harmful activities. We've already demonstrated that. I'm going to communicate that there are consequences for violating the sovereignty of democracies in the United States and Europe and elsewhere. I'm going to be clear that the transatlantic alliance will remain vital, a vital source of strength for the UK, Europe, and the United States. I'm going to make sure there's no doubt as whether the United States will rise in defense of our most deeply held values and our fundamental interests.
So it might sound separate, but a big part of confronting Russia, as far as the Washington establishment and Joe Biden is concerned, is strengthening these international institutions, strengthening the international rules-based order. That is what President Vladimir Putin has specifically said that he is essentially trying to take down. And that is what Joe Biden is doing here in Europe, renewing America's commitment to those institutions. Guys?
So Matt, looking at today, we know Prime Minister Johnson had a good working relationship with former President Trump. Back in 2019, then candidate Biden called Johnson a, quote, physical and emotional clone of Trump. So with that as the backdrop, what can we expect to see during now President Biden's meeting today?
Well, I mean, it depends is that an insult or not. It depends on what you think of President Trump or whether or not you think that Boris Johnson is a physical or emotional clone of President Trump. Boris Johnson is one of the few leaders at the G7 who actually kind of favored President Trump. President Trump managed to rankle almost every other leader who's going to be making an appearance this weekend, except for Boris Johnson. Now, actually, Joe Biden more recently angered Boris Johnson when he criticized the arrangements for Brexit and how that might, according to Joe Biden, reignite some of the tensions in Northern Ireland that have been buried since that Good Friday Agreement back in the late 1990s. That's a complicated issue, but Boris Johnson is going to be trying to get on the good side of Joe Biden, and he's hoping that, I'm sure he's hoping, that they will forget a lot of these past slights and problems. Guys?
And Matt, tomorrow is the official start of the G7. So what is on the agenda for day one?
Well, like I said, the main agenda is going to be renewing American commitment to international institutions. After that, it's going to be dealing with COVID and dealing with climate change. As far as the Biden administration is concerned, and one of the reasons why this Atlantic Charter is mimicking what happened back in 1941 during World War II, is because all leaders throughout the world, especially Joe Biden and others, they see these international crises like climate change, like COVID, as just the kind of impetus that international institutions need to renew their crucial role in the world. That these problems, these challenges can't be confronted by countries alone. They have to be dealt with by these international institutions. That is going to be the main agenda item throughout the entire weekend. Guys?
All right, Matt Bradley, thanks so much.
Today, President Biden will announce a plan to buy 500 million doses of the Pfizer COVID-19 vaccine to donate to struggling countries. This comes as new coronavirus cases worldwide remain high. Countries like India and Brazil are still struggling with new waves of the virus, and in most of the developing world, access to the vaccine remains a huge issue. NBC News health and medical reporter Erica Edwards is here with the latest on the pandemic. Erica, good morning. So tell us how this donation will work and when could we see that vaccine actually heading to these struggling countries?
Hey, Savannah, good morning. Well, actually, very soon, the Biden administration has announced the first 80 million doses will be delivered or even sent by the end of this month. Overall, this year, 200 million doses of that Pfizer vaccine are expected to be donated, with another 300 million in early 2022. Now, all of this will work through a humanitarian program called COVAX. The World Health Organization runs it. It's intended to deliver these vaccines safely and fairly and equally to nearly 100 low-income countries. Now, when asked about the plan yesterday, National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan told reporters the president is focused on helping to lead the world because he believes it is the right thing to do. It is what Americans do in times of need when we have the capacity and we have the will and we step up and we deliver. Now, that certainly reflects the tone that Matt was just talking about. President Biden is expected to talk more about this plan later today at that G7 summit. Savannah.
So, Erica, back here in the U.S., nearly 141 million people are fully vaccinated, which is quite good. We're not quite on track to meet the president's goal, but we are still vaccinating. But that number, of course, doesn't include kids. But we've got some news here with kids. An FDA advisory committee is meeting today to discuss vaccine authorization for children. What can we expect from that?
Yeah, this meeting is intended to cover a wide variety of topics, all related to pediatric COVID-19 vaccination. Everything from, safety to how long these kids should be followed after they get their shots. All ages will be discussed, from 6 months to 17 years old. It's sort of setting the stage for potential emergency use authorization of those vaccines or even full licensure. I talked with the acting chair of the committee, Arnold Monto, yesterday. He told me he expects a wide provide an open discussion looking at the potential risks versus benefits. One issue that is certain to come up is a rare but potential link to heart inflammation following COVID-19 vaccine, especially in young males. Savannah.
And now, Erica, more than 21 million Johnson & Johnson vaccine doses have been distributed nationwide, but nearly half of them have actually not been used. Now, thousands of those doses are actually set to expire. I mean, tell us what's happening here. Are health officials doing anything about this? Can we move these vaccines somewhere where they are needed?
Right. Well, health officials and even state political leaders have been trying to encourage folks to use these vaccines. They're only viable for about 3 months in refrigeration. The FDA is looking at potential ways it could extend the shelf life. Meanwhile, we were talking about low-income countries earlier, places like Haiti, for example, where COVID cases are rising. Not a single COVID-19 shot has been administered in that country. Savannah.
Oh, my goodness. That's just heartbreaking to hear. Erica, thank you so much.
A new report is shedding some light on the controversial clearing of protesters by federal police last year in Washington. You may recall these scenes from last June. Officers firing pepper balls into a crowd of Black Lives Matter protesters at Lafayette Square Park. A short time later, then President Trump walked through the area for a photo op with a Bible at St. John's Church across the street. Now an inspector general says police did not clear the park for the president. NBC News national security correspondent Ken Dateline joins us now. So, Ken, if Park Police didn't clear the area for the president, then why did they do it, according to this report by the Interior Department's Inspector General?
Joe, the report found that the Park Police made the decision hours before because they were concerned that the demonstrations in Lafayette Park were getting more and more violent, and they wanted to clear the park and put up some anti-scale fencing to keep protesters further away from the White House. Now, of course, this is a confounding and surprising finding by the Inspector General because it really upends what we all thought we knew about that day. And I spoke with that IG, Mark Greenblatt, and he said, look, if I had found that this happened because of Trump, I would have reported that. Let's take a listen to what he did say, Joe.
But there was no clear time when the Park Police had a clear understanding of the exact time, whether the president would be coming out or the time that the president would be coming out. The Park Police was making its decisions based on when the fencing contractor would be ready and when the law enforcement personnel were ready to clear the park and secure it.
Now, Joe, that doesn't mean that this IG found that everything was kosher with what happened. He found that, for example, the Washington, D.C. police fired tear gas at protesters, even though the Park Police didn't want to do that. And Bureau of Prisons officers fired pepper balls. And he's not really opining on whether anyone's civil rights were violated or excessive force was used, Joe.
So we know, Ken, that former President Trump has released a statement after the report was published. It says in part, thank you to the Department of the Interior Inspector General for completely and totally exonerating me in the clearing of Lafayette Park. The events of that day are now the subject of a federal lawsuit by Black Lives Matter against the Justice Department. So how could this IG report maybe affect that case?
Great question. I was looking at that case yesterday, and it seems to me it's going to cause a big problem because the case is premised on the idea that was exploded by this report. However, there may be other claims because, look, I mean, there's widespread allegations that the police, the Park Police, and other organizations used excessive force that day. Our own Garrett Hake was there, and he said that the protest at that time was completely nonviolent until the police moved in, and that's when the violence started. So there may still be some legal remedies that can be pursued by some of those protesters, Joe.
All right, Ken Dateline, thanks so much.
Now to our week-long look at the immigration crisis called American Crossroads. Migrants are arriving at the southern border at rates not seen since the early 2000s. Border agents are straining their resources to get control of the situation. NBC News Justice correspondent Julia Ainsley sat down for a roundtable discussion with local law enforcement along the border. She joins us with what they told her about their struggles. Julia, good morning. I mean, you went right to the people who are dealing with this. What did they tell you?
I did. Well, first I was with federal agents who said that they're frustrated that 30 to 40% of their manpower is tied up just processing immigrants. And then I was invited to a weekly breakfast at a diner in Pharr, Texas, where these law enforcement agents, people who are chiefs of the cities all along that very busy corridor in the Rio Grande Valley, as well as the sheriff of the county of Hidalgo, told me what that means for them and how much of their resources are now spent doing the job that the federal partners can't do. Let's take a look.
We have seen a steady increase in illegal migration.
As a Border Patrol agent, Jesse Moreno is on the front lines.
Hey, Troy, Romeo 273. Oh, is there anyone standing in the brusher?
We tagged along with him recently for an exclusive look at how Border Patrol is handling a 20-year record high in migration across the southern border.
Yeah, I mean, I hear your radio. It's going off every minute. Does the Border Patrol have the manpower to respond to that many people all at once?
We do the best we can.
Agent Moreno operates in the Rio Grande Valley, where Border Patrol has seen more activity this fiscal year than in the last 10 years. And that's only the recorded numbers. Border Patrol estimates that so far this year, around 20,000 migrants have crossed the border here undetected. The Border Patrol chief in this region says that's extremely concerning.
This sector hasn't seen those type of numbers before. That pulls about 40% of my manpower away from the border security mission just to address this humanitarian mission. We've seen increases in fentanyl. Just this fiscal year, we've had 1,000 pounds of methamphetamine seized, 1,000 pounds of cocaine. So those hard narcotic numbers are very high.
Is this more of a national security problem or a humanitarian problem?
For us to provide national security, we need to know who and what is coming across our borders. When I have to pull 40% of my manpower from that national security mission, I have gaps.
From rescuing more and more injured migrants to uncovering stash houses where migrants and drugs are kept, a group of local police chiefs here told us the surge has had an effect locally as well.
A lot of the federal resources have now had to repurpose their day-to-day, if you would. They spend a lot of their time processing these families, so that tasks our daily resources.
But the chief said that focusing only on the surge in migrants misses the point.
Perception is that we have immigrants crossing over and they are invading our cities and our neighborhoods, and that's simply just not the case.
The family units and the unaccompanied children, they pose absolutely no security threat for us. What it does, it ties up the hands of my federal partners, our federal partners.
Their message, what crosses the border doesn't stop at the border.
Those people and those drugs are going to your city. They're landing here. They're crossing here. But they're going to Houston. They're going to Dallas. They're going to Chicago. They're going to New York. That's where these folks are going.
Now, Julia, what happens to those who illegally cross the border now? I mean, what has the Biden administration's policy been? I mean, we heard from VP Harris saying don't come, but what happens when they do?
Yeah, that's been the big question this week as the vice president has traveled to Central America trying to address these root causes. And our own Lester Holt put that to her. There's really not a good answer. They're saying don't come. But right now, there's really not a legal way, a systematic legal way for people to come into the United States, except for unaccompanied children who are coming here to claim asylum. The rest are turned back. So instead, they're just processing and turning back so many of these migrants. And in the meantime, we have a lot of other things coming across the border, like drugs, that these agents say that they are not able to get a handle on like they'd like to.
Julia Ainsley, as always, incredible reporting. Thank you so much.
Let's get a check on your morning news now weather and a look at what's burning in the sky this morning.
It's very cool, Bill, and I feel like we probably could have seen it, but I
was
missed
wrong.
it.
I didn't think it was going to be that great. I was thinking, it's a partial eclipse. It's at sunrise. Not many people can see it. I was completely wrong because some of the areas, some of the photography and the pictures are incredible. I mean, I thought the clouds would be a problem. The clouds made it more gorgeous.
Yeah, wow.
I mean, it's like a crescent sun. It's just absolutely incredible, the pictures that were taken. The New York City area was fantastic. Boston, Hartford. It was really only visible from like Ontario through the Northeast. So a lot of the country, you didn't have a chance to see it. But for that little small section of the country, it was incredible. And the reason that it happened, and the reason why it was called the Ring of Fire solar eclipse, is that the moon's at the farthest point away from from the Earth, so it can't block all of the sun. That's why it's not a total eclipse. The effect is only partial, and it was about 70 to 80% covered at the peak, about 5:30 this morning over the Northeast. So the other issues, weather-wise today, once again, it's raining hard in northern Mississippi. I mean, give those people a break. Flash flood watch continues over Little Rock to Monroe, Louisiana, Tupelo, Starkville. Those areas in maroon are under flash flood warnings. Even Washington, D.C. is under a flash flood watch today. Could see some slow-moving storms this afternoon. The dry air has moved into New York and Boston. Enjoy it. Finally, some relief from the heat and humidity. But there's those storms today from Atlanta to D.C. In the middle of the country is steaming hot, and that's not going to stop. We're going to continue that right into your Friday. And, of course, the weekend forecast coming up next hour.
All right. That's a tease.
To it. Now I have total eclipse of the heart in my head.
Thanks for the gorgeous picks.
Coming up, if you've been noticing more headaches and longer lines at airport security checkpoints, you're not alone.
Yeah, the TSA is dealing with a massive staff shortage, bottlenecking the already tedious process. A look at America's post-pandemic hiring crisis, including at the airport, up next.
America's airports are feeling the effects of a nationwide labor shortage. With the country reopening just in time for summer, the TSA is struggling to keep up with a sudden increase in travelers. NBC News correspondent Aaron McLaughlin explains what's happening and how it could impact your next trip.
Hey, Savannah and Joe, at airports across the country, we're beginning to see long lines and delays, with media reports that TSA is experiencing staffing shortages and union members warning this won't be an easy fix. To airports across the country, a summer scramble for staffing, with a record number of travelers returning to airports after historic pandemic lows. The TSA warning in a memo obtained by the Washington Post that more than 130 of the nation's largest airports are struggling to staff airport screeners. The ripple effect from the TSA shortage already being felt by travelers at major airports.
It's crazy.
Security lines so long in Austin and Charlotte, hundreds of travelers have missed their flights. While airports in Detroit, Denver, and outside Washington, D.C. reportedly among the hardest hit.
Like a zoo.
With a summer spike in air travel expected, a top TSA official warning help is needed, asking TSA office workers to volunteer to manage long lines and other non-security related tasks, according to the memo. Union reps say this problem can't be solved overnight.
You can't train a TSA in a matter of weeks. TSA is a very dangerous job that a lot of people don't know, but we get very minimum wage pay.
TSA releasing a statement insisting the agency is well positioned to meet rising traveler volumes. Pointing to a concerted recruitment effort the agency began in the winter with $1,000 incentives for positions nationwide. If you're traveling this summer, experts say arrive at the airport 2 to 3 hours before your flight. And don't forget to wear your mask. It's still a federal requirement both at the airport and in the air. Joe and Savannah.
Now let's stay on this job news. There's good news if you are looking for work, because job openings have reached record numbers as America reopens and demand surges. The Labor Department recorded 9.3 million available jobs in April. That's 1 million more than just in March. But things are tough for small businesses. 48% say they're struggling to find qualified workers to fill those vacancies. And it's leading to record rates of people quitting their jobs, actually. NBC News senior business reporter Ben Popkin joins us now. Ben, good morning. So fill us in on what's going on here. Why are we seeing so many companies struggle to fill open positions when we know people need jobs?
Well, across society right now, we're seeing this sort of great sorting out happening in the labor market. I mean, just because there's job openings doesn't mean that those who are out of work are the right people to fill them. I've interviewed many experienced unemployed workers. They say they can't find work in their field, and they're not going to run out for these entry-level hourly jobs and start lifting boxes, say, for Amazon. But according to surveys, workers are also staying home due to virus concerns, childcare issues, caring for family members, and there's a bit of a catch-up. During lockdown, if you were lucky enough to have a job, you held on to one. So last year during the pandemic, we saw about 6 million fewer people quitting than we usually would. There's a bit of catch up. And as labor markets opening up, people are more willing to take those leaps, quit, change job. That's tightening the labor market further, causing workers to expect or hold out for higher wages.
And now, according to the Labor Department, Ben, a third of people who quit their jobs came from the retail sector. Now, many of those employees cite pay as the reason for quitting. I mean, walk us through through that? Because, of course, if you quit, then you're not getting a paycheck at all. But what do these companies need to do to retain these employees?
Well, let's take a step back and look at things a bit. Women make up the majority of the workforce in retail, and women disproportionately have had to bear the childcare burdens during the pandemic. With childcare prices higher, availability low, they have to juggle. Can they really make enough to cover the cost of someone watching their kids? And if workers are quitting because they say wages are too low, the answer seems a little obvious. We might want to raise wages. Retail operates on thin margins, and they've been reluctant to cut into those margins. So some businesses may have to rethink their model, compete on wages, offering signing bonuses and incentives. They're going to have to get creative and listen to employee needs.
Yeah, we've actually heard some pretty cool stories about that, about what companies are doing that are kind of these unique things to help employees. Now, many employees say they want to continue working from home. This is a big one. I mean, employers are planning for a return to the office. Let's talk about how companies navigate this new culture. Will we see a permanent change to office life? I mean, it's kind of funny. I've actually been talking to people here because, look, we all signed up for these jobs thinking that they were in a building that is, in some physical location. But then this year showed us kind of what we can and can't do, what is working and isn't working. How do companies navigate that?
Well, what's in vogue is a sort of the hybrid office approach with flexibility. So some employees are in the office while others are remote, depending on their needs and concerns, beaming into team meetings. We'll see how long this lasts. While this kind of avoids some tough decisions on the front end, experts warn that down the line it has the potential to build resentment between the remote workers who think their colleagues are getting FaceTime, being seen as more committed, while the office-bound may resent those working from home who no longer have to face long commutes and get to do a load of laundry between tasks. So managers really need to think hard, top to bottom, what are the actual requirements for every position and role? And make conscious, thoughtful decisions to create and recreate that team cohesion, and also avoid discrimination by managers and coworkers, especially as companies are trying to pursue diversity hiring goals, hire people who may not be able to afford to work in those headquarters cities, and make sure that workers are being treated fairly.
Yeah, somebody said this week to me, Ben, I don't really want to go back because now in between meetings I get on my Peloton. I'm like, yeah, that's not something you could do at the office. All right,
sure.
Ben,
Sure.
Thank you so much.
Let's take a look at what's making news around the world this morning.
We have Claudio Lavanga with us from Rome. Good morning, Claudio.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. Well, an apartment block in Mumbai has collapsed, killing at least 11 people, including 8 children. Now a frantic search is ongoing as authorities fear there are more people stuck under the rubble. Now, the incident coincided with the first downpour of the monsoon seasons, and monsoons in the past have been partially blamed for collapsed buildings in India due to poor construction. And in Myanmar, the military authorities have charged the deposed leader, Aung San Suu Kyi, charged with corruption. Well, now the army seized power in February and has been cracking down violently on protesters ever since, accused Suu Kyi of accepting bribes worth more than $600,000. If she's found guilty, she could face a jail term of up to 15 years. And a giant sculpture of world leaders attending the G7 summit in the UK has appeared in Cornwall. Now, the sculpture looks like the rubbish version of Mount Rushmore, and I don't mean it as an insult to the artist. It is made of rubbish. It's made of electronic waste. Now, the idea from the artist is to tell these leaders to make this electronic waste more recyclable. I even coined a new name for the new sculpture, guys. Well, from Mount Rushmore to Mount Rubbishmore. How does that sound?
Pretty funny.
A compliment, of course. A compliment, yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Just keep it there.
Thank you, Claudio.
Coming up, closing Guantanamo Bay. President Biden wants it done by the 20th anniversary of September 11th.
But he wants it done quietly. We'll explain why next. A little Lady Liberty is heading to New York just in time for Independence Day. It's a 9-foot replica of the Statue of Liberty, so about 1/16 the size of the real one. It was made in 2009 and put on display at a museum in Paris for the last decade. Once the statue arrives here, it's actually going to sit on Ellis Island across from the original statue from July 1st to 5th. After that, the little sister will live at the French ambassador's residence in Washington, D.C. for 10 years. A spokesperson for France's National Museum of Arts and Crafts says this long-term loan sends a simple message that the friendship between the two countries is very important. So you can See the very, very tall one or the 9-foot one, which is still tall. Just
kind of funny, though, that they're putting it right next to it, the other one.
They're just going to stare at each other.
You think there'll be like a line for that one, too? I don't know. All right. Very cool, though. Thanks, Joe. Yep. Lawmakers are continuing another round of bipartisan infrastructure negotiations after President Biden's talks with Republicans collapsed this week. NBC News congressional correspondent Leanne Caldwell joins us now on that and a bunch of other stuff she's going to catch us up on Capitol Hill. So let's start there, Leanne. Good morning. Members of President Biden's own party have been increasingly critical of these drawn-out talks, saying we're just not going to get Republicans on board. What are they calling for now?
Good morning, Savannah. That's absolutely right. And it's not just the progressives who are complaining, like Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but some moderates as well, including Senator Michael Bennet of Colorado. And so that is a huge sign that there is little patience left with Democrats while Republicans and Democrats continue these bipartisan negotiations. These Democrats say that they are not going to get what is urgently necessary in talks with bipartisans. They point to taxes against corporations and the wealthy. They point to really aggressive climate change provisions in infrastructure. And there's a long list of things they want that are not being discussed with Republicans. And so these Democrats say, look, time is short. Let's move along.
Now let's switch over to gun reform. You learned that the House-passed gun reform bill may die in the Senate. Tell us why, and does that bill have any path to move forward? Because we thought this was something where we could actually see some bipartisan light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, after a series of mass shootings, especially in March, when there was just a number of them, these talks really ramped up in the Senate between Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, this is a longstanding issue for him, Senator John Cornyn of Texas. Well, those senators told me yesterday that they have stopped talking. They could come to no meaningful compromise. And so they didn't say that it was necessarily over for good, but they are definitely taking a break. So that is a very bad sign. They were just talking about expanding the universe of background checks, and they couldn't agree on much, Anna.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly can't get something as big as this done if you haven't spoken in weeks. I mean, that's some big news there. All right, Leanne, we're also seeing some fallout from the Joint Senate Committee report on the January 6th insurrection. Yeah. How's the Capitol Police Union responding to that report?
They are calling for the acting chief, Yogananda Pittman, to step aside. She has come under a lot of pressure in light of that report, especially that was really devastating for her leadership. During January 6th, she was in charge of intelligence. And as we know from that report and previous accounts, that the intelligence was misread, mishandled, and miscommunicated leading up to January 6th. And so they're calling for her to step aside. No response yet from the Capitol Police. Vanna.
All right, Leanne, thank you so much.
Coming up, the heated relationship between Washington and TikTok seems to be cooling off.
Yeah, the Biden administration's reversal of Trump-era orders against the app. That's up next.
NBC News has learned that President Biden is quietly making moves to start shutting down the U.S. detention facility at Guantanamo Bay ahead of the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. NBC News Pentagon and National Security correspondent Courtney Cubie was one of the reporters who broke the story. She joins us now. So, Courtney, what are you hearing about these plans?
So the idea here is they're going to take a less aggressive approach than Vice President Joe Biden took under the Obama administration. The Obama people came in and they were sort of hard charging that they wanted to close the facility down. Literally on day one, they issued an executive order saying they were going to close it. Well, then they were met with a lot of resistance, primarily on Capitol Hill. So the Biden team, during the transition, they thought they were going to take an aggressive approach as well, but they realized this is not going to be as easy as they hope. There are about 40 detainees there, and while there are about 20 of them that can probably be transferred to other countries over the matter of the next several months with a lot of diplomatic negotiations back and forth, there are still anywhere between 10 and 20 that are going to be very difficult to deal with. And the big issue here is there's still a law on the books that says they can't come here to the U.S. So the question is, what are they going to do with them? That's the big question that the Biden administration is trying to figure out right now, but they're doing it very quietly, hoping that no one notices because they know this is a political lightning rod of an issue, Joe.
Yeah, Courtney, we know this was a goal for former President Obama, one he was unable to accomplish. So this time around, how much resistance is President Biden expected to face?
A lot, mainly on the issue of what is he going to do with the so-called unreleasables, the ones who they are not likely to be transferred to another country, mainly because they're sort of the worst of the detainees. The U.S. wouldn't necessarily be able to find a country who would take them, who would also be able to provide the security guarantees to be sure that the individuals these detainees would not somehow be released. So they're the ones that they're the hardest to deal with. Now, if they bring them to the U.S., they would have to put them in some sort of a supermax facility or something. But there are very few, if any, states that want to take that on.
And to be clear, we know the president wants plans in place to close the detention facility by September 11th. What's the likelihood he'll actually achieve his goal of shutting it down by the end of, say, his first term?
So it's not outside the realm of possible. It's going to be difficult. And again, the main reason is he's going to have to there's two things he's going to have to do. Work with the Hill to get the law changed that's written into the National Defense Authorization Act that says that you can't bring any detainees here to the U.S. And then find some sort of a governor, most likely a Democratic governor, who will be friendly enough to the idea of bringing any of those additional detainees here to the U.S. into some sort of a supermax facility. The most likely option for that would probably be Colorado. But the Biden administration hasn't started either of those processes yet. So that's going to take some time, in addition to the fact that they still need to find countries to take some of these other detainees and work out security guarantees.
I was just thinking Colorado is the first state that came to my mind, too. All right, Courtney, thank you so much. Appreciate your reporting.
The clock is no longer ticking for TikTok. President Biden signed an executive order Wednesday reversing a Trump-era policy that tried to ban apps linked to China. NBC News senior media reporter Dylan Byers joins us now. Dylan, good morning. So President Biden isn't just voiding the former president's policy toward TikTok. He is asking for an investigation here. Why is that, and what could it look like?
Yeah, look, the reason why is that the Trump policy, the whole Trump approach to TikTok was very ad hoc. It was very politically motivated, and it did sort of strain the legality of what a White House should do when it comes to dealing with a foreign business that has business in the United States. The Biden approach wants to be more comprehensive, and it wants to be more thoughtful. And it wants to come up with policies that can apply to companies, foreign companies across the board. So what he's asking the Commerce Department to do here is to basically take the case up again, reinvestigate the matter, and then come up with a comprehensive policy that can address the issue of the risk that's posed to Americans' privacy, to Americans' data, when you are talking about foreign companies that have mobile applications inside of the United States.
Now, Dylan, I remember fans of TikTok, users of the app, freaking out when this was a potential that it was just going to be shut down. Everybody saying, hey, tomorrow you might not have access anymore. But how has TikTok handled the ban? Remind us of that. And also, how are they responding to this latest update, essentially saving the app here in the U.S.?
Sure. Well, so to the initial news, the world for them under a Trump administration was utter chaos. They had to keep making the point, look, we act independently of the Chinese government. We don't give the Chinese government any access to American user data. And they had to repeatedly try and make that case, while meanwhile being vulnerable to the sort of whims of the Trump administration. They are not commenting publicly on this latest order from Biden. But what I can tell you, they're thinking privacy is this points to much more stability ahead. It does not mean that they're out of the woods. It doesn't mean that they couldn't run into an issue in which U.S. policy deems that TikTok has to sort of change its business model or get out of the country. That could happen. But for the foreseeable future, it's smoother sailing and much more stability in terms of understanding what the lay of the land is with U.S. policy.
Yeah, and I think after what we've seen happen, it certainly doesn't mean that those privacy concerns for just some users even are not necessarily there after everything we've heard. Dylan Byers, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you.
It has been nearly a month now since the CDC said fully vaccinated people can ditch masks in most occasions. That announcement came with this tweet from CDC Director Rochelle Walensky: "Your health is in your hands." But is that statement enough? In The Atlantic, Ed Yong writes that during a pandemic, no one's health is fully in their own hands. He says the pandemic response is focused too much on individualism and personal responsibility, even though public health is really a big picture issue. Ed Yong joins us right now. Ed, very thoughtful read. Glad to have you with us. You know, we've heard leaders and public health officials make similar statements that our health is in our hands. It's up to us to get vaccinated. In your mind, what's the impact of that when it comes to trying to get this pandemic under control?
I think it's unfortunate because it centers people who've already been vaccinated, people who had the privilege of having early and easy access to vaccines. And it leaves aside the most vulnerable parts of society, including a lot of communities of color who've found it difficult to get access to vaccines. It leaves aside immunocompromised people for whom the vaccines will be less effective. And obviously leaves aside children and also essential workers who now have to be in this difficult position where they're working in places where they're in regular contact with people, many of whom will be unvaccinated and maskless. The CDC should know better. They are a public health agency. They should center equity and put the vulnerable first instead of centering people with privilege.
And jumping on that, I want to talk about something else you wrote. You say that when leaders signal to vaccinated people that they can tap out of the collective problem, that problem is shunted onto a smaller and already overlooked swath of society. You know, right now we tend to look at unvaccinated people and often say, well, it's hesitancy, because if you want a vaccine, you can get one. But you point out for many, that's really not the case. I mean, equity and access problems still exist, right?
Access problems are huge. I think the CDC and some others seem to be laboring under the apprehension that because everyone is eligible, all adults are eligible for a vaccine, that anyone can get one. And that simply isn't true. As I said, a lot of communities of color include people who really want vaccinations, but either don't have a vaccine site near them, don't have public transportation options, or can't get time off work to either get the shots or to recover from the side effects. And, you know, why is that? It's because we have a long history of racist policies that have pushed communities of color away from healthcare and put them in poorer communities that have poorer access to healthcare. So now we see these pockets of immune vulnerability mapping onto pre-existing pockets of social vulnerability.
So, Ed, in the end, what is your main takeaway? What do you think the U.S. can learn from the last 15, 16 months to help us respond to future public health crises?
Pandemics are inherently a collective problem, and they require people to act as a community on behalf of each other rather than putting their own self-interest ahead. And, you know, while that might be a tall order for a country that is so famously individualistic, with this rhetoric of pulling yourself up by the bootstraps, public health, the field that the CDC should represent, is meant to think bigger picture. It is meant to think about communities and protect the health of the most vulnerable first. And if we don't do that, if we leave those people aside, then we all suffer. Like, we cannot beat a pandemic through a me first attitude. It has to be all of us working together.
Ed Yong, you can check out his latest in The Atlantic. Ed, thanks so much for joining us this morning. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
For kids and parents everywhere, June means one big thing: the end of the school year. School's out for summer, but some parents are using the summer to break the summer break to help their children return to a life of normalcy. NBC News correspondent Kristen Dahlgren has more.
136. On this Massachusetts field, lacrosse is back. But for some, the so-called return to normal is anything but.
It just feels weird seeing everybody's full face, and it always feels like I'm missing something.
For a lot of kids, like 12-year-old Charlotte Sutcliffe, post-pandemic life can be confusing and still scary.
I think most of my friends have been pretty respectful, and I think they're on the same page as I follow the guidelines, and I don't take my mask off unless I feel completely comfortable.
Her mom says they took things slow.
We started to go out more, spend more time with friends outside. We went to a museum just to kind of practice being around other people.
And she's not just speaking as a parent. Ode Hannon is a psychologist and runs the Child CBT program at Mass General.
Some kids have been very reluctant to leave home. We have a lot of concerns about separating from parents or interacting with peers. Some kids are worried about getting sick.
Hannon says there are a few things caregivers can do. Talk about it. Don't dismiss what kids are feeling. Come up with a plan kids can use to help themselves be brave. Make the transition gradual. And make sure kids understand everyone does things at their own pace. Charlotte will be fully vaccinated soon and is getting more comfortable every day. She says things like a plane trip may still give her pause, but she knows at her own speed she'll reach her goals. Kristen Dahlgren, NBC News.
Time now for our CNBC Money Minute, the biggest financial headlines of the day and why they matter to you.
Dominic Chu is with us today. Hey, Dom, good morning.
Good morning, Savannah. Good morning, Joe. Well, Facebook could debut a long-rumored smartwatch by next summer. That's according to a report by The Verge. It will feature a display with 2 cameras that can be detached for taking pictures and videos to share on Facebook and Instagram. Facebook has also had a spotty track record of making hardware. Remember, a phone was debuted back in 2013. It was a flop, and it has yet to disclose sales numbers for the Oculus virtual reality headset or its Portal video chat device. We'll wait and see what happens there. Starbucks is running short on basic items in some stores, including cups and coffee syrups, as the chain moves back to full operations in the wake of the virus pandemic. Baristas are telling the Wall Street Journal that cake pops, cup stoppers, and mocha flavoring are among some of the items that have run out at times in stores. A spokesperson says the shortages are temporary, but Starbucks has removed oat milk from its app until they can restock that inventory. And Uber has updated its app to make pickups go a little bit more smoothly. Drivers can now see what side of the street a rider is actually on, which could help them avoid wasting time by having to circle the block to find you. They'll also see a label explaining where a rider is with some more context, such as at a Starbucks location instead of just a street address. Now, once a trip is underway, drivers can choose from more routes and select the best option based on things like time and distance. Now, Joe, Savannah, we talked about this in the past. I am a tri-state area driver. I drive around. I live in Connecticut. I work in New Jersey. Sometimes I have to take an Uber to work, and I insist that this is the best way to go, but the driver refuses, saying, no, this is the
it's
map.
An awkward
this is
conversation.
What it's telling me to go. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? I mean, you guys use Uber in the city.
Right. And if you argue too much, they'll give you a low star rating.
Yeah, and then you get a bad rating. It's honestly even worse than a cab, though, because they usually do know what they're doing, but you're like, wait, I think I know too. But yeah, it's awkward no matter what. That's great, though. That's interesting.
It seems long overdue.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, by the way, the way I say takes them less time and it costs me less money in tolls. But then, there's a whole thing where Uber doesn't reimburse for certain tolls and it does for others. And it was a whole rigmarole. So.
Well, Dom, sounds like they're taking you for a ride. So, all right. Right. See you soon. Thank you.
You got it, guys.
Coming up, Bill Gates, billionaire co-founder of Microsoft, prolific philanthropist and farmer.
Yeah, sort of. The tech titan is the nation's largest farmland owner. We break down what he's growing and how it could come across your plate next. You know him as the founder of Microsoft, but did you know that Bill Gates is also the nation's largest farmland owner? According to data gathered by The Land Report and NBC News, Gates owns more than 269,000 acres of farmland across 18 states. That includes the land where McDonald's gets its potatoes. NBC News tech investigative reporter April Glazer has the story.
Hi, Savannah and Joe. Yeah, we found all kinds of things that are growing on Bill Gates's land. Vegetables, cotton, rice, soybeans, even the potatoes that are used for McDonald's French fries. That's in Washington state on the southern border with Oregon. He has a 14,500 acre farm that's growing potatoes that turn into French fries. We also found that in North Florida and South Georgia, there are Vidalia onion farms and carrot farms that are growing vegetables in his dirt. He actually sold the farm in Georgia recently, but he did once grow those onions. And, according to the Land Report, with all of Bill Gates' land holdings, he is actually the largest farmland owner in the country. Now, I want to be clear that he's not Farmer Bill Gates, right? He's not wearing overalls and getting in the dirt. He's actually more of a landlord. And he represents a growing trend amongst investors who are using farmland as an investment vehicle. And the reason why they do that is because, if the stock market's going up and down, farmland generally doesn't depreciate. And that's because there's not going to be more farmland, right? There just is what it is. And so he is not using it as well as part of his broader climate goals, we learned from our reporting. The Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation confirmed that their climate work does not include the U.S. agricultural holdings of the Gates. And then Bill Gates also said that this isn't part of his larger climate plan. However, his investment firm did say that the acreage he owns is enrolled in a sustainable agriculture program. Local farmers I interviewed in North Florida and South Georgia said that he's doing basically the same thing that Big Ag was doing before he got there.
Even if you don't watch America's Got Talent, you've probably seen those viral golden buzzer moments.
Absolutely. This week, a singer diagnosed with terminal cancer performed an original song about her journey, moving Judge Simon Cowell to tears. NBC Nightly News anchor Lester Holt has that story.
Well, Savannah and Joe, it was simply remarkable what happened on the stage of America's Got Talent, something powerful and authentic that no one will forget. If you had told Jane Marcheski a year ago that she would step onto the stage of America's Got Talent, chances are she wouldn't have believed you.
I was a stick of dynamite and it just was a matter of time, yeah.
A little more than a year ago, I was diagnosed with terminal cancer and given 3 to 6 months to live. Based on the statistics, I had a 2% chance of survival.
Said I knew what I wanted, but I guess
Jane, who performs under the name Nightbird, sang an original song that chronicled her tumultuous journey this past year.
It's okay, it's okay.
That song brought the normally stoic Simon Cowell to tears.
There was something about that song after the way you just almost casually told us what you're going through, and
prompted him to hit the golden buzzer, sending Nightbird straight to the live shows.
I've been preparing for a moment like this for my whole life. I have lots of songs and lots of stuff to share, and I hope that life keeps opening up a path for me to do that.
Hey, NBC News viewers, thanks for checking out our YouTube channel. Subscribe by clicking on that button down here and click on any of the videos over here to watch the latest interviews, show highlights, and digital exclusives. Thanks for watching.